Welcome to the third session of the Tanakh and the Halachic Mindset as part of the Semicha program of Torah Tahava. We've discussed the first chapter of Bereshit so far. To recap, the important concepts that are introduced in those three chapters are that all men were created in the image of God, which leads to the idea of equality between all races and also between the genders. The idea that there was a certain period where we had a perfect world, but that exists only in potential, that's the divine world, and that the world as we know it is afflicted with many problems, and it is our responsibility to fix it and perfect it and protect it. And there's also the idea contained in the story of Etz Hadat and Etz Haim that all humans go through the stage of recognition and growth that comes from the realization that we have free will, that's eating Etz Hadat, and that we all have a solution to fight our demons or to take control of life through eating the fruit of Etz Haim, which is the Torah. There's also the storyline in Bereshit that presents what happens to humanity as God attempts to convey the moral message of the Torah to humanity. So there is a failed attempt and then a successful attempt. The failed attempt is the one that runs through Adam, Cain, Lemech, and Noah. And the successful attempt is the one that starts with Avraham. The difference between the two stories is that Adam is the first creation according to the Torah. This is the first creation of man, of God, and there were no special tests or examination to see if it fits the role of being the leader of humanity or the one who accepts the divine word, the Torah. Then it goes on in the same manner until Noah, who is picked as a righteous man just in comparison to his generation. And it's only when Avraham comes that Avraham is chosen based on his character traits and his behavior, with the goal of eventually teaching the Torah to the whole world. This is an important concept because today Judaism has abandoned the idea of reaching out to other nations. Even within Judaism, we build boundaries and try to alienate certain people. But the original idea was that the Torah is a way of life that could affect the whole world. And as such, if we believe that this is really the best way that one can manage the world and make it a better place, then we should really teach it to all humanity. And Avraham is chosen. When he is chosen, we don't know yet why he is chosen. But then later on, in chapter 18, the Torah reveals that I have chosen him in order for him to teach, or because he is the one who will teach his children and his descendants after him, they will follow the path of the Lord, the path of Hashem, to do loving kindness and justice. Meaning that instead of giving the Torah to all humanity as it was originally planned through Adam, now the Torah is going to be given to one individual who has the potential to teach and educate future generations. They, in turn, will teach their extended family. And then when we look at Matan Torah, before Matan Torah, God tells Moshe, you will be for me a kingdom of priests. Now, if we look at the concept of Kohanim, the Kohen was one who had to serve in the temple, but the rest of the time had to teach and convey the message of the Torah to the people. As later on we find in Malachi, the lips of the Kohen are the guardians of knowledge, and they will ask to learn Torah from him, for he is the Malach, the messenger of God. So if God tells Moshe, you will be a kingdom of priests, that means that Am Yisrael, in relationship to the rest of the world, is as the Kohen is to the rest of the people, meaning we have to be the teachers that convey the words of the Torah and promulgate this knowledge. So this is the storyline that runs, as I said, from Adam to Noah to Avraham to later on Moshe, and this is something that we have to revive and go back to in teaching as much as possible, not only to Jews but also to non-Jews, the concept of the Torah as a way of life. And as we'll see when we get to the books of Halachot, and especially Devarim, how the mitzvot of the Torah are tailored to improve our life and to lead us to better life for us and for all of humanity. So when we look at chapter 4, which starts with the dispute between Cain and Hevel, that story ends with murder, where Cain defends his actions and defies God. This is the story of the deterioration of humanity. The story itself is complicated. One might say that this is a story where Hashem shows us what not to do. We should not, as parents, give preferential treatment to one child over the other. And if we do that, we have to explain what happens and not just say, you have to accept reality, because that doesn't end well. In any case, Cain rebels against God and says, you have driven me away and I have to hide from you. His accusation is that God's system is not working because Adam had to hide from God and eventually was driven away from Gan Eden. So Cain says, if it happened to my father, it happened to me, then maybe something is wrong with the system. God pardons him and lets him live. But the next step is the story of Lemech, where Lemech officially announces that he's going to kill anyone who will oppose him or even wound him or do anything against him. This is what he says, I killed the man for wounding me and the child for bruising me. And then he goes on to say, you come to Cain, if Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lemech will be avenged 77-fold, meaning that now Lemech looks at what happened to Cain. He says, if we have a murderer that was able to escape unscathed, unpunished from the hand of God, then I could do it deliberately. So we have this progression or regression from the sin of Adam and his wife, which was a transgression of an arbitrary law that did not have an impact on anyone. I mean, according to the way the story is told, no other human being was affected by the transgression of eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. This is maybe the lesser level of transgression where maybe certain municipal laws are being broken, etc. Then we have a crime of passion committed by Cain, where out of anger he kills his brother. The next level is that of Lemech, which we could call premeditated murder, that it says, I'm now making an announcement that I will kill anyone who will oppose me. And that statement of Lemech comes simultaneously with the beginning of civilization, which is described through the 4 children of Lemech, Yaval, Yuval, Tuval, Cain, and Naamah, that represent all facets of civilization. Yaval is Avi Yoshev Oelu Mikneh. He represents agriculture. He dwells in tents. He has flocks. Yuval is Avi Kol Tofes Kino Ve'ugav. He's the musician who plays the lyre and the pipe. But the musician is not just an entertainer, definitely not an entertainer, but rather a historian and a teacher. Because in antiquity, all of the oral tradition was conveyed through music, and even today we see that we could remember much better words of songs than texts of books, or we could remember paragraphs of chapters from the Torah that we study with the trope. And Tuval Cain is Lotesh Kol Horesh Nehoshet Barzel. He's the blacksmith who represents technology. V'hot Tuval Cain Naama. The sister is Naama. The word Naama means pleasant. So the 4 children encompass all facets of civilization: agriculture, technology, education, and leisure or enjoying life. But with them comes this Lemech who says, I will control by sheer force. And that leads to the story of the flood, where this becomes not only the ideology of an individual, but the ideology of a government. That is in chapter Vav, ותשחט הארץ לפני אלוהים, ותמלא הארץ Hamas. The land was filled with Hamas. Hamas in the Torah means injustice under the disguise of a legal system, that which could compare to the Nazi Nuremberg laws that put Jews outside the framework of the law. They were all legal. They were all voted on and legislated, but they are laws of Hamas, of injustice. So from Adam, who commits a transgression against an arbitrary law, to Cain, who commits a crime of passion, to Lemech, who declares premeditated murder to uphold his rule or authority over those around him, to the government of Hamas, who destroys the whole earth through injustice, and then the story of the flood, which has its own ideological problems, but not immediately related to halakha, so they will not be discussed here. The important thing to discuss in terms of halakha, in what follows the flood, is one that we see that the Torah moves from telling Adam and his wife and his descendants to be vegetarian, which we see in the first chapter of creation, chapter 1, verse 29. הנה נתתי לכם את כל עשב זורע זרע אשר על פני כל הארץ ואת כל העץ אשר בו פרי עץ זורע זרע לכם יהיה לאכלה. See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. But then, after the flood, the Torah says, כל רמס אשר הוא חי לכם יהיה לאכלה, כי ירק עשב נתתי לכם את כל. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses I give you all these. However, you must not, eat flesh with its life blood in it. So this is important to bear in mind, because as we look at the laws of shechita, of slaughtering of meat and milk, etc., we will realize that the idea of educating people not to be cruel is essential to Judaism, and only that the extreme demand of being vegetarian before the flood led to, it's a possibility that is what led to extreme violence amongst humans. So even today, in certain, we could look at a culture such as Hinduism, where some people are vegan, but at the same time, there's the system of caste of a stratified society where more than 6 million people are called untouchables and live in subhuman conditions. How can one reconcile the idea of, I'm not going to harm an animal, but it's okay if humans live in squalid conditions like that? So the Torah balances it out here, but we'll see later on what are the implications of the idea of avoiding cruelty and taking care of the world in terms of the halakha. Here comes an essential verse: Shofech dam ha'adam, ba'adam damo yishafech, ki b'tzelem Elohim asa et ha'adam. The rabbis derived from this pasuk, whoever sheds the blood of men, by men shall his blood be shed, for is an image did God make man. The rabbis derived from this pasuk the halakha that abortion is allowed when the fetus endangers the life of the mother. We will get to this halakha hopefully later when we do bioethics. But for now, let us look at the pshat of the pasuk. The pshat of the pasuk has nothing to do with abortion, which the rabbis learn from the word shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. He who sheds the blood of man within man, his blood will be shed. So they learn that abortion, which is killing one person within another person, is forbidden. But this doesn't work with the pshat of the pasuk, because the way it's divided is very clear. Shofech dam ha'adam, he who sheds blood of man, ba'adam damo yishafech, his blood will be shed by man. The reason why the Torah emphasizes that is that in ancient societies there was a concept of kofer, of ransom, of redeeming a murderer for payment. And we will see this concept coming up again in the Torah in other places. The idea to us sounds preposterous to let a murderer walk free in return to a certain payment that he will make to the court or to the community. But to ancient society, it made sense because if a murder occurred within a small village, let's say that has 100 inhabitants, and let's say that the blacksmith killed the carpenter, that each person has a profession, has a role. The blacksmith killed the carpenter. Now the villagers are missing a carpenter. If they will convict the blacksmith in murder and will kill him as well, then they will be missing a blacksmith as well. So for their immediate selfish gain, they would have thought that it's better to have the blacksmith pay a fine that maybe will serve as a deterrent to other criminals and let him live. And Torah says that this is not an option, and that we cannot relay the responsibility for punishing criminals to God, because it is our responsibility. It is our responsibility to establish a judicial system and to punish those who offend or harm or kill other humans. The insistence of the Torah is, he who sheds the blood of men, by men his blood will be shed. Meaning that there's no pardon for that. Ki b'tzelem Elokim asa et Adam. For man was created in the image of God, and he who kills another person negates the idea of the image of God. Therefore, he lost his own image. And that is an admonition that is still, I think, valid today. Of course, after due process, after making sure that there was indeed murder, that it was done deliberately, that there are no other considerations, and that the person was not framed. But after all, the Torah is in favor of that punishment, because this is how society will be established in with order and justice. So, despite our reluctance to be violent, there is here the understanding that sometimes this kind of violence is necessary because it will prevent future violence, and in a way we could say that the murderer himself pronounced his verdict by killing another person, because he denied the idea of the image of God. So, of course, the Bedin, the court, has to be very careful with that. We don't do it today in Israel, in most countries of the world. But this, from the point of view of the Torah, if we don't, I'm not advocating for applying the death penalty in that manner, but the idea of responsibility, that it is a responsibility of society to take care of the crimes or the wrongdoings within the community, is an important one. We cannot say, let God take care of it. We have to do as much as we can to amend the situation. Following the story of the society or the world of the flood, we encounter the story of the Tower of Babel, of which I have written, and I'll say it briefly, that the Tower of Babel is not a story of sin and punishment, because the builders of the tower did not intend to do anything. Not yet. They did not harm men. They did not turn against God, but rather their focus was wrong, because their intention was to create one language and one ideology to which everybody will adhere. God sees that and says this will lead to terrible consequences, because there will be oppression. This, we could say, is, if we look at other governments as maybe the flood, the pre-flood government, as the government of Hamas, which could be described as maybe either oligarchy or anarchy. Here we find a government of extreme, of communism to the extreme, where the name or the fame of the country overrides the importance of the individual, similar to what happened in the Soviet Union during the moon race, where all the money was spent on the moon race while farmers were starving and their machinery was failing, or North Korea launching missiles that explode mid-air and whose price could have fed the whole country for 20 or more years. So a similar thing happens in Migdal Bavel, and God, as a gift to humanity, creates this mixture of languages. This is another origin myth, meaning did not necessarily happen that way, but rather it's a story, it's a prophetic story that tells us the origin of languages, saying that it's a gift from God. The ability to have diversity and to speak in other different languages and to look at different things from different angles is a great gift. So in a way, we could say that this story also encourages the arts, the fine letters, some things that somehow were abandoned by the religious community, as we say that working with plastic arts or drama or singing or literature are not important enough, and we understand from that story that they are extremely important, because those are the tools and vehicles for the individual to express himself or herself. In many ways, one could say that the modern Orthodox community, definitely the ultra-Orthodox community, but I'm speaking even the modern day Orthodox community, is somewhat like the Tower of Babel, where everybody has to adhere to the same hashkafa, to the same worldview, to speak in a certain way, to dress in a certain way, to accept certain institutions and reject others. This is not a healthy situation, and we have to address it in educational institutions, within our families, to let enough space for this diversity and the freedom of the human spirit, just as God intended for it when He provided this diversity of languages in Migdal Bavel. Following that story, so now we're going through societies in Bereshit that the Torah checks out one society after another; they all fail. We will later on see that in the following parasha, Lot chooses to live in Sodom. Sodom, contrary to common belief, Sodom's sin was not sodomy, even though the word sodomy refers to homosexuality. It really refers to the sexual act without consent, but it's not what the Torah says. The Tanakh never explains, not in Bereshit, what was the sin of Sodom, but it does say that in the book of Ezekiel, in chapter 13, verse 49. Chapter 16, verse 49. The Torah says, Navi says, "Hineh ze haya avon Sodom achotech, gaon sivat lechem v'shalavat hashket haya la velivnotea, ve'ad ani ve'evyon lo ehezika." Only this was the sin of your sister Sodom. Only this, arrogance. So this is the Navi insists, only this was the sin of your sister Sodom, arrogance. She and her daughters had plenty of bread and untroubled tranquility, yet she did not support the poor and the needy. So what really happened in Sodom is that selfishness, then we could say this is capitalism to the extreme. If the Tower of Babel was communism to the extreme, here we see capitalism to the extreme, where to each his own. The poor, the needy, those who come from the outside are not welcome. That's the reason why when the guests come to visit Lot, the people of Sodom surround the house and say, "Bring out the men and let us know them." Yes, it means know in the biblical sense. They want to rape them, but it is not for pleasure. It is not a consensual thing. It has nothing to do with homosexuality. It has to do with embarrassment. They want to embarrass those people in such a way that will ensure that no one will ever come again to visit the city. So the Torah knocks out one form of government after the other, whether it's oligarchy, totalitarianism, communism, capitalism, and eventually Avraham is presented. Avraham, we could say, is the rule of one. The one person who, through adherence to the words of the Torah and tzedakah mishpat, loving kindness and justice, will be able eventually to educate the world. We continue in Sefer Bereshit. In chapter 17, we find the commandment about the Brit Milah, and this is the only mitzvah that we find in the book of Bereshit, the only mitzvah that is later on repeated in the Torah, in Sefer Shemot, that one must perform the circumcision on the 8th day. Anything else that is mentioned in Bereshit is not repeated later on in the Torah as a commandment. The most famous one is Gid HaNasheh, the sciatic nerve. It is mentioned as a practice, as a custom, which we'll talk about when we get to Hilchot Shechita and the Ma'achalot Asurot, the laws of forbidden foods. But basically, the Torah says regarding Gid HaNasheh, the sciatic nerve, therefore, the Israelites do not eat the sciatic nerve, but does not phrase it as a mitzvah. And the rest of the laws that people attempted to derive from Bereshit are only insinuated as practices such as the dowry or the laws of one could say matchmaking or wedding, funerals, eulogies, etc. They're all insinuated. They only show us what the practices were in the time of the Torah. As a matter of fact, if we talk about that, we'll see later on that there are certain practices that oppose the law of the Torah, such as the Levirate law, the Yibum, whereas the Torah says Ki yeshavu achim yahdav umet echad mehem uven law, that if one of the brothers dies without a child, then his brother should marry the widow in order to reestablish the inheritance or the genealogy of the dead brother. In Bereshit, we find that Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, attempts to establish the Levirate law through her father-in-law, since she wasn't able to do it through her brother-in-law, as if it were according to the Torah, this is what the Torah would have wanted, she does it through her father-in-law. So it seems that there are certain practices that pre-existed the Torah and that they were different. So the question here, the question that we must ask when we address the idea of the seat in life or the historical background of the mitzvot is whether the law that we find in Torah is an essential law, a law that Torah wants us to follow for eternity, or it was a law that came to address a certain situation, but once that situation is gone, then maybe the halacha will change. That question also pertains to another important element that we find in Bereshit, and that is of the sacrifices. Avraham, and after him Yitzhak and Yaakov, and even before them Noah, offer sacrifices to God. Actually, even Cain and Hevel offer sacrifices to God. It seems that was the natural way of worship, and I might say even today, this is the way people think of their relationship with God. They have to make a certain sacrifice, whether it's a mental sacrifice, a sacrifice of time, of energy, of money, something they have to do to show their relationship to God. And even when we talk about a relationship with other people, we talk about them sometimes in terms of a sacrifice. This is something that I'm willing to do for you to show how much I love you. So when we come to the Korbanot, we'll have to ask the questions. As we all know, according to Maimonides, the Korbanot were a compromise that God allowed the Israelites, when they came from out of Egypt, to bring sacrifices, because that was the only way of worship that they were familiar with. Is Maimonides suggesting that in the future there will be no sacrifices? So, and if this is true, then what is the role of the temple in our literature? And why do we speak so much about the sacrifices in our prayers? It is possible that we do that because this is the only thing that we are capable of hoping for. We're praying for past glory, because we're not capable of thinking what will the future bring. But this past glory keeps us motivated to do greater things. This is one possibility. The other possibility that yes, there will be a temple, but maybe when the temple will be rebuilt, then the sacrifices that we will bring will not be animal sacrifices. Maybe they will be only offerings of bread and vegetables that people will share together. No one knows for sure. But what we do know, and that's the next thing that we have to tackle as we go through the book of Bereshit, the famous story of the Akedah, of the binding of Yitzhak. This is in chapter 22. God tries Abraham, or tests Abraham, to see whether he will be willing to sacrifice his own son. I wrote and spoke about it extensively in other places, so I'll just say briefly here that it is obvious from the context of the story and the way it ends that God never intended for Abraham to sacrifice his son, and actually he wanted for him to stand up and say, I am not going to do that. Abraham was supposed to oppose to the request of sacrificing his own son. The Torah teaches us several lessons. One is that we should not ask a favor from someone if we know that he cannot say no. And Abraham was asked by God to bring his own child, and he was so close to God, he had such intimate relationship with God, that he was not able to say no. That is one lesson. The other lesson is, of course, that God is not interested in human sacrifices, and it will be derived from that later on that God is not interested in animal sacrifices as well. The one of our big, I think, major problems of Jewish theology, that at a certain point, mainly after the destruction of the second temple, and because of the close relationship with, or at least proximity in time and space with early Christianity, Jewish theology started accepting the idea of martyrdom, of dying to sanctify God's name, and we will talk about the exact details of how this halakha evolved from the ancient halakha to the time of the Maccabees to the Mishnah and beyond. But it is obvious that the idea of martyrdom has become more important and more central in Jewish community in Germany because of the Christian influence. The idea of sainthood, of martyrdom, seeing the crucifixion everywhere, described in statues and in drawings or murals, affected the Jews. They felt that this is the right way to worship God. I mean, if not the right way to worship God, at least they felt they have to be at the same level as their neighbors, the Christians, in their service of God. Whereas in the Sephardic world, who lived under Islam, this was not of such high importance, because people slowly came to rationalize the idea that one, when faced with mass conversion, with the demand for mass conversion, one should rather try to save his own life and restart Jewish life somewhere else, which, as we know, happened during the expulsion from Spain. In any case, the idea that one has to sacrifice his life, and if not his life, at least something, it permeates modern Orthodoxy today. Definitely ultra-Orthodoxy, but even modern Orthodoxy, in the sense that when people speak about, even about Pesach, you might hear someone say, yeah, of course, we know Pesach is not easy, we suffer. No, we know, we're not supposed to suffer. Pesach is a happy, joyous holiday. If we stick to the core halachot as they should be, it's not a big issue to clean the house or to kosher the house, to prepare the right foods. No halacha, and that's an important rule, no halacha, no mitzvah should be associated with suffering. Difficulty, yes. Not everything is easy. But suffering is not part of the ideology of the Torah. This is a non-Jewish idea that entered our religion from Christianity and from an attempt to rationalize our own suffering and exile through the long years of diaspora. The pasuk in Tanakh that best describes the Akedah is in Micah, chapter 6, the verses 6, 7, 8. And that is where the prophet asks, Bama akadem Adonai ikaf lelohem marom, ha'akademenu be'olot ba'agani b'nei shana. With what shall I approach the Lord, do homage to God on high? Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? So up to here, the prophet says, should I bring a sacrifice to God? God says no. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? Here is a direct reference to Abraham. Does God want human sacrifices? It starts with the question, does God want animal sacrifices? And ends with, does God want human sacrifices? And the answer is no. He has told you, oh man, what is good. Now you should know, you the son of man, what is good. What the Lord requires of you. Only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God. This again is direct reference to Abraham, because Abraham was the one who did it tzedakah or mishpat, loving kindness and justice. And here mishpat ve'avat chesed. What is atzniah lechet im Elohecha? Walking modestly with God. It does not speak about modesty of dress, which is not at all a concern of the Torah and not a concern of the Tanakh, but rather something that has been blown out of proportion by later scholars, later sages. But rather the pasuk speaks about the modesty of religious practice. You want to be religious, you want to be observant, it's between you and God. You don't wear your religion on your sleeve. You don't flaunt it around to show people how religious you are, because then it loses all depth and meaning. The idea of the religiosity or the religious adherence in the Torah is that we improve ourselves, that we become better people, we connect to ourselves, we connect to God, and through this we connect to other people and we affect them for the better. This is the idea that is contained in Ve'ahavta le'reacha kamocha, love the other as you love yourself. Meaning that first you have to love yourself, find what is the best way for you to realize your potential, then take this and apply it to other people. Use your powers and talents to help other people. So this is the story that we learn, or the message that we learn from the Akedah. And as I said, there's more material in writing and in audio classes that we could use. We keep moving through the book of Bereshit, and we learn from the story of Yaakov and Esav several things. One is that a husband and wife should communicate better, because the lack of communication between Yitzhak and Rivka led to the great confusion with the blessing for the children, which led in turn to their feud, the Yaakov running away, and to all the future traverses of Yaakov, all of his suffering in the book of Bereshit, in the house of Lavan, the way he's being deceived by Lavan to marry Leah before Rahel, the way his children fight in between themselves because they came from different mothers, who one of them felt less loved than the other. What happens with his children who deceive him? All these are directly associated with what Yaakov did to Esav, taking his blessing without consent, deceiving his father. The Torah teaches us that when we do something that is inappropriate, we will pay the price. And Yaakov definitely paid the price. It is only much, much later in Nevi'im HaAcharonim, in the book of Malachi, chapter 1, verse 2, where we read this famous pasuk, Esav Yaakov ne'um Adonai v'ohav et Yaakov v'et Esav saneti. Yaakov is a brother to Esav, yet I have accepted Yaakov and I have rejected Esav. This is a much, much later prophecy that could even have taken place after the return from Zion, where Esav is already identified as an enemy. But in the Torah itself, we don't find that Esav was a wicked person, and there's no justification for what Yaakov did. The storyline, how Yaakov keeps being deceived by his father-in-law, by his wives, by his children, and how the children, his children deceive each other, clearly show that Yaakov had to pay dearly for what he did to Yaakov, to Yitzhak, and that the Torah wants us to know that we have to act with honesty. So this is the message that we learn from. It's a halachic message because it pertains to the way we behave on a daily basis. We could say that this really is the idea of business ethics. We learn other details of business ethics from the response of Yaakov to Lavan when Lavan accuses him of running away. This is in chapter 31, verses 38 to 40, where he says, "Ze 20 shana anochi imach, rehelecha ve'ezecha lo shikelu ve'elez onecha lo achalti, terefa lo הבאתי אליך, אנוכי אחתנה, מידי תבקשנה, גנובתי יום וגנובתי לילה." He says, "These 20 years I have spent in your service. Your ewes and she-goats never miscarried, nor did I feast on rams from your flock. That which was torn by beasts I never brought to you. I myself made good the loss. You exacted it of me, whether snatched by day or snatched by night." Yaakov says that he had full responsibility, even beyond what other shepherds would do. But we learn from that there were cases of accusations of between the owner of the flocks and the shepherds of animals that were missing. We'll talk about it later when we get to the laws of shechita. What is the idea of, what is the concept of terefa as it appears in the Torah? With that, we conclude the discussion of the most important points with the halachic implication in the book of Bereshit. And of course, having in mind that the full story of the sibling rivalry between Yosef and his brothers, and the dilemma of Yosef of whether he should notify his father when he became the viceroy, or should he keep on hiding himself, maybe as an attempt to fulfill the dreams or to fulfill the mission that he think was meant for him. These are really the I would say the dilemmas, the halachic dilemmas that we have on a regular basis. That how do we balance what we think is the will of God with reality? Maybe those are the two conflicts that we could say typify the book of Bereshit. One is the story of the Akedah, the dilemma of Abraham of, should I go with what God had told me and sacrifice my son, or should I go with my heart and my conscience, which says that I cannot kill humans, that I cannot kill my son, that I cannot do this to my wife Sarah, who is going to be agonizing over that. That is one dilemma. The other one is that of Yosef, where Yosef finds himself in the position of the viceroy, and he believes that he was meant to be there in order to provide a safe haven for his brothers and father, but he fails to notify his father, maybe because he thinks that this will cause him to abort the mission. So, and later on, I think that Yaakov rebukes him for that. When they meet, he keeps saying, "Oh, now that I saw you, I could die," as if telling him, "I was living dead all these years that were away." So those two stories, I think, typify the conflicts that people have in the world of halacha. That those are, I would say, the bulk of the questions that come to the desk of a rabbi. It's not about, there are questions about, how much matzah I should eat, what is the height of this chair and the length of that sleeve, etc., etc. But the questions that are really dilemmas that one cannot draw a clear line of black and white are those that become a struggle between our commitment towards God and our emotional ties and our sensitivities and the way we care about other people. Many people would say today that emotions has nothing to do with halacha. Or in other circles, when they discuss that, the term meta halacha would be used. It's a very favorite term nowadays. Meta halacha as the ideas and the concepts that are outside the realm of halacha. But I would like to disagree on that and say that there's nothing which is meta halacha. All the factors, every single details about the life of an individual, of a family or a community that faces a certain halachic question, they all count, they all part of halacha. An example for that we could see in Masechet Sanhedrin, where the Mishnah says that one who has no children, or who is now very old and does not have young children, cannot serve as a judge in a court that could decide on issues of capital punishment, because he lacks the midah of rahamim. He doesn't have that sensitivity anymore. Since he doesn't have his own children, or his children are already old, is lacking on the ability to sympathize with the accused. It's an amazing statement by the rabbis. They say emotions do count. We need that judge to be emotionally healthy and to be able to understand what the person who stands in front of him, what is he going through. An example from modern halachic literature would be the example of aguna. We have, as we know, two types of agunot. The aguna whose husband is missing in action, missing or in an accident, or so like a terrorist attack such as the Twin Towers, and the aguna whose husband is in front of us, I mean, he's available, accessible, but who refuses to give a get. Now it is agreed among rabbis that when we deal with an aguna whose husband is missing, that we will do anything within our power to help her get out of this state of being anchored or being chained to a missing husband, and to let her remarry. The halacha understands her plight. But when it is an aguna whose husband is in front of us, we could hear or read rabbis saying, okay, she could wait, or she doesn't have to marry someone else. Not understanding that it's not about her marrying someone else, but rather her being able to feel that she's not tethered to someone who controls her, who chains her. That is an emotional thing. But if we realize that this is for her an extremely important thing, then we would not say that, but rather try to find a solution for her as well. Or another example, what people call giyur lehumra, a reconversion. Someone who has converted in a certain way that may be not accepted by all, and is being told, okay, we want you to convert again. It's not about the dry halacha of whether we are going to just to make sure, just to be safe, we're going to take that person and ask him or her to dump in the mikveh again. It's us questioning the identity of that person. Someone who grew up Jewish, and according to even certain opinions of halacha is Jewish, and now we are going to tell that person, you're not Jewish enough, or you're not Jewish at all, and we want just to make sure to have you dumping in the mikveh. What we're telling that person is that basically your identity that you lived by for the last 10, 15, or 20 years is not there. And that is a big problem. I had people that I dealt with that when I brought up this issue to them, and that's how I feel about them, they start crying and saying, yes, it's true, they took away my identity. This is a big issue. We don't know that the Torah allows us to do that. If, according to the law of the Torah, a person has converted and his conversion is valid, how do we have the power to come and question that? To say, no, just for the sake of strict halacha, we want to discuss this again. Or something which is less, maybe less severe, but much more common, and that is disputes between spouses, husband and wife, about halacha, or parents and children, where the parents feel that they must impose strict halacha, or where the children who went to yeshiva or to a religious school feel that they must bring their parents up to speed and to have them keep halacha in the best, what they think the best way possible. So, and that also, I had situations of a neighbor, for example, whose husband used to go to another synagogue, another shul, and when we would come back from synagogue, she would say, "Oh, you finished already?" And it would say yes. And she said, "Oh my God, now my husband is going to be back home." She dreaded the moment that her husband is back home from shul on Shabbat, because he would start fighting with the kids right away about how they do certain things. So for him, that maybe from his point of view, he believes that for the sake of God, he must do whatever is necessary to make sure that his kids do not transgress Shabbat. From what he achieved in the personal level is creating a state almost of an animosity between him and his wife. The children dreaded his return home from the synagogue, and as a result, drifted away from observance slowly. So here also we are obligated as rabbis, as teachers, to find the golden path, the middle way, where the parents and children can meet in the middle and say, you see, this is either to find a more lenient view of halakha, or to say it is better for you to let them be to let your wife or your husband or your brother or your sister or your child, your son or your father do what they do, respect them, and make them feel that you could be an observant Jew and still be part of that family, part of that world. Maybe it will change their mind, maybe it will not. But one thing is for sure, that trying to impose on them will not work. So this is an extension, an amplification of the dilemmas that Avraham faced when he was asked to sacrifice his son, that Yosef faced when he was dealing with the question of, do I reveal my identity? Do I tell my father that I'm alive? Do I risk the mission that what God sent me to do? And I think with that we could wrap also the whole book of Bereshit and say that this is the essential question of what is the purpose of Torah and Mitzvot? There are two worldviews, main worldviews within Orthodox Judaism. One sees the purpose of the world as the observance of the Torah for the sake of that very goal. The observance of the Torah, when the whole Torah is observed, God is happy, or the world is perfect. So even if there's only one person in the whole world who observes the whole Torah, that is fine, because the Torah has been observed. It's about the Torah and about God. It's not about humanity. Another worldview, there's another extreme, would say the Torah is all about mankind. It's all about humanity. The Torah carries with it the message to heal humanity. So if by observing the Torah we push people away from that goal, we push people away from observing the Torah, that something has gone awry. This is not what we want. So if we apply this dichotomy to the situation that we have today in the Jewish world, we would see that one camp says, I don't care that only 10 or 5% of Jews observe the full Torah, what we think is the full Torah, with all the restrictions and all the fancies, all the practices that were added on to this magnificent building of the Torah over millennia. We don't care that only 5% keep that. That is fine. Even if it will be only 1% of 1%, that will still be okay, because the Torah has been observed. And we cannot change any halacha, or we cannot update any practice, fence, or law to remedy that situation, because the situation is not flawed. Everything is okay. And on the other hand, you have people who say the ideal of Torah is that as many people as possible will observe the Torah, and hopefully even people outside the fold of the Jewish people. And if we don't have that, that's a failure. So when we take this question now and we apply it, for example, to the idea of a fence that was created by the rabbis, we ask ourselves, we could use the argument that appears over in the Gemara. Kol gzera she'en hatzibur yachol la'amod ba. If it's a gzera, if it's a decree that cannot be followed by the tzibur, right? And gozrim, you have to not make the decree or recall the decree. But when we come to proponents of the first worldview, that is that as long as some people do it, it's okay. That some people observe the full Torah, we're fine, and we say, the people cannot follow the decree. Let's just take a random example. People cannot wait 6 hours between dairy and meat. We have to change. We have to make 3 hours. They say, no, it's okay. In our community, it's fine. Everybody keeps it. If you would say, legumes on Pesach is impossible to keep, or it's very hard to keep, it very expensive, they would say, no, it's not, because our people could do it. You would say, what about the other 85% or 90% who don't do it? We don't care about them because they're not the tzibur, they're not the community. Meanwhile, the other worldview would say, if 85 or 90% of Jews do not follow these laws, then the purpose of the rabbis in creating the fences is lost. Because they wanted to create fences in order to help people remain within the fold of Judaism and observe the Torah, but now they're not doing that. So that all brings us back to the very beginning of Bereshit, from the Midrashic point of view, when the Midrash says that Adam erected a fence around Etz Hadat in order to prevent his wife from eating the fruit. He said, do not touch and do not eat, but it led to her transgressing the fence, touching and then eating. This, of course, according to Midrash. But what the Midrash was trying to tell us is that we have to be very careful that what might happen is that by creating so many fences around the Torah, we'll end up transgressing the Torah. And I think this is what we are facing today. By adding so many layers of prohibition and restrictions and details of halachot regarding concepts that are not even biblical, we have pushed people away, and we cause them to not be as observant as they could have been if they only observed the core concepts of the Torah. So this is something that we'll touch upon again in other occasions, but for now, we have concluded with this discussion, the book of Bereshit.